Hiya, I'm Bruce Fumi. If you're Scottish, then you might want to be free of English oppression. So when did the English oppression start? What was it like? And how do we get out of it? If they sound like interesting questions, then this is the video for you. When was Scotland free? Well, this is the old Scottish Parliament building. On the 16th of January 1707, a parcel of rogues inside voted to adjourn this Parliament and form the United Kingdom. And we've been run by English ever since. Or maybe it's more complicated than that. You see, there had already been an Act of Union before that, and Scotland had been run by England more than once. If you're interested in the people, places and events in Scottish history, then hit the subscribe button at the bottom right at any time during this video and ring the notification bell to make sure that you're informed when I bring out new videos. In the meantime, let me tell you 5 stories. Yes, that's right. We're going to look at 5 times Scotland threw off the yoke of English oppression as we ask, when was Scotland free? I'm tempted to say that almost since it began, Scotland's been fighting to maintain its independence from England. But then again, that assumes that Scotland has always been the same thing. That England has always been the same thing. That independence has always been the same thing. And none of these things are true. You could say that Scotland started in 843 AD when Kenneth MacAlpin, already king of the Scots of Dalriada, became king of the Picts. I suppose it was a bit like when James VI of Scotland became James I of England. 2 kingdoms, 1 king. Although monarchy and statehood changed dramatically from the time of Kenneth MacAlpin to the time his descendant, James, wanted to turn his 2 possessions into 1. You could say that Scotland started in 904 AD when Kenneth's grandson, Constantine II, was the first king recorded as bringing the church, the crown and the Scots nobility together in a formal ceremony at Scone. What we do know is that hot on the heels of Mother Scotia's labour was born the slightly younger but larger neighbour, the English magpie. Neither one was what we'd call Scotland or England today. Edinburgh here wouldn't have been part of either. Similarly, Newcastle, Carlisle and Glasgow. Check out my video, Birth of Scotland. The point is that these nascent kingdoms were geographically smaller than today. And in both cases, these kingdoms only existed as long as the kings could hold them together by force of arms and personality. And in both cases, the kings were out to expand their authority and control. Because that's what Dark Age and medieval kings did. That's why in 934 AD, Aethelstan of England came north with an army as far as Dunnottar and a navy as far as Caithness to impose himself on Scotland. Scotland became a sub-kingdom of England. Now, the idea of a parliament taking a vote to adjourn itself would have seemed bizarre to Aethelstan or Constantine II. Their rule and authority was personal. What that meant is that Constantine made a personal submission to Aethelstan. Any independence movement would be some other warrior giving Constantine the chop, telling Aethelstan to stick it, and then waiting to see if Aethelstan could be bothered coming all the way back to Stonehaven. They do have a very good chip shop, actually. So, how did we get out of it? Well, 5 years later, Aethelstan died, and his authority died with him. And Scotland, such as it was at the time, was once again held by Constantine, until he retired to a monastery at St Andrews 4 years later. But the next time England imposed itself on Scotland, Scotland was a bit bigger. Malcolm Canmore kind of had control down to the Solway-Tweed line, although it was a bit tenuous. Of course, there were still Viking types in the north and in the islands. England was different too, though. The Normans hadn't long invaded. Now, obviously, there were probably some Saxon English that still hoped to take back control of their money, laws and borders. And the fish. Don't forget the fish. What are they like? William of Normandy, William the Conqueror, wanted to gain control of his border in the north because Malcolm Canmore kept crossing it and nicking stuff. He wasn't finished expanding his kingdom either. Now, William came north and forced Malcolm to pledge an oath of submission at Abernethy in 1093. Now, this was still a personal oath of submission, but kingdoms had solidified, kings had more authority, and oaths on behalf of a kingdom were a wee bit more secure. So how did we get out of it? Well, fortunately, Malcolm gave his oath with his fingers crossed behind his back. See, the English might be sly, but we're pretty sneaky too. And it wasn't long before Malcolm was up to his old tricks, heading south for loot again. Actually, Malcolm and his son and heir were killed in one of these border raids. I can't remember if it was the last one or the one before. Don't worry, that's a detail. Malcolm's Saxon wife died 3 days after him. That's a detail as well. The point is that when Malcolm's brother Donald became king, all bets were off. Scotland was again independent. And then in 1174, Malcolm's great-grandson got himself into a bit of a fix. Now, by this time, Scotland and England were geographically much closer to what they are now. The border was firmly established. Well, nearly. At any rate, just like his great-granddad, William the Lion of Scotland crossed it and got himself caught. Watch my video, The King Who Lost Scotland. The title is a bit of a spoiler. Things were more complicated by this stage. Norman feudalism, people are signing treaties, checking for fingers crossed behind your back. It was a nightmare. There were legal systems, there were courts and stuff like that. Now, don't get me wrong, ultimately, force still won the day. But with no get-out-of-jail-free card, William had to sign the Treaty of Falaise. And that meant that Scotland was once again subject to England, and oaths weren't enough this time. Key Scottish castles would be handed over to English garrisons, and the Scottish Treasury would have to pay for it. Other than that, a lot of things ran as they had before. So this was worse than the previous oath swearing in Tata the New, but not as bad as, well, that's for later. How did we get out of it? Well, in a stroke of good luck, Richard I of England, Richard the Lion, wanted to go on crusade, but he didn't have the money. And so we bought ourselves out of the Treaty of Falaise. Turns out that Richard's crusade did liberate the Holy Land. This one. By 1296, Scotland was Scotland, apart from Orkney and Shetland. And the iron fist of Edward I of England, yeah, I think they know who he is. The fist of Edward Longshanks was now wrapped in the mitten of legal niceties that to this day provide a facade of justification for the powerful to control the weaker. And as the dance of legal justification was performed, Edward's army watched and waited. Stand back and stand by. But what Edward did in 1296 was new. Scotland was subsumed into England. He took the symbols of nationhood, the sceptre, the royal records, the stone of Scone. We were now part of Edward's kingdom. We were now England. How did we get out of it? You're joking, aren't you? Whether you count Scotland's independence from Bannockburn in 1314 or the Treaty of Edinburgh-Northampton in 1328 matters not. Independent we were, until Oliver Cromwell. Now, the Wars of the Three Kingdoms were a messy business, and I need to make some more videos to simplify it for folks like you and me. But by the 17th century, Scotland, England and Ireland had the same king, but different religions and different internal power structures. Have you ever been at a party with a family like that? Oh, awkward doesn't even begin to describe it. By the end of the night, everyone's turned on everyone else. Dad's playing the kids off against each other. Everyone's changed sides more than once. Dad won't back down. Mum's greeting in the kitchen. And then the eldest chops off Dad's head and you haven't even had your pudding. Oh. Elder brother calls it the English Civil War because he thinks it's all about him. Then, in 1649, Scotland welcomes a new King Charles II to replace his father Charles I, who's had his head chopped off. Oliver Cromwell, who's clearly the elder brother in this tortured metaphor, says that he's no having this. He invades and annexes Scotland a year later. Now, the official legal veneer takes till 1657 to polish, but a proclamation's made at this Market Cross in Edinburgh on the 4th of February 1652, and that Parliament's closed and the Scots get 30 seats in the English Parliament. That was the first act of union between Scotland and England. How did we get out of it? Well, Oliver Cromwell died. The English decided that their republican experiment hadn't really worked out as well as they'd thought, and they decided to reinstate the monarch whose Scottish coronation had set off the invasion and union 10 years before. That's when the union was dissolved and Scotland became independent again. So by the time the 16th of January 1707 arrived, and those parcel of rogues, motivated by a combination of threats and bribes, voted, Scotland, in its various forms, had already been subject to England in its various forms, in a variety of different forms. From loosely based personal oaths to brute force couched in legal justifications to more brute force in a union. 1707 had included the threat of brute force, but also included the explicit commercial and economic threats, including the Aliens Act. You know I've got a video about that, don't you? Over 900 years, things had been changing. From monarchies held together by the personal prestige of kings, to modern nation states with legal structures masking more subtle threats and power balances. So how did we get out of it? First, I should make the point that I've only spoken here about 5 events: 2 submissions, 1 takeover and 2 unions. What about all the other invasions and occupations, the rough wounds of Henry VIII? What about the economic blockades? What about the subtle inference of military threat that made treaty negotiations imbalanced? These things aren't exclusive to the relationship between Scotland and England. These are the universal political realities of power balances between larger nations and smaller ones. Our situation isn't unique. It's replicated around the globe in locations that you've never heard of and who care little about Scotland or our southern neighbour. China and Taiwan, Estonia and Russia, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia, Lebanon and Syria, Panama and the United States. Independence and freedom are not the same thing. So how do we get out of this? 2 things are certain. However bitter you get on Twitter, the ballot box is better than the sword. And whatever happens in 2021, history suggests it probably won't be the end of it. If you'd rather hear me talk about Scotland invading England, then why not watch my video about the Battle of the Standard here? To support the channel, click the white tab here or the link in the description below. Ha mbeidh docas gwn bia lá má live. Cheer in Drasta.